Hey, it's Jack, and this video is why do I keep attracting narcissistic men? Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, here's a little invitation. You can just click here, hit subscribe, tap the bell notification, and then you'll hear of new videos as soon as they come out. I'm Jack Butler. I produce at least 3 videos a week, most weeks, on love and relationships and personal growth. So let's get into this. If you've been having a difficult time with narcissistic men, I want to say sorry. I get that that can be really, really difficult, and there are probably, honestly, some ways that I don't even get because I haven't probably had that experience. So I'm glad you're here, and I really think I've got something in this video that can help you. I'm going to make 3 major points in this video. Now, the first one, I'm actually going to start by sharing, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but the word narcissistic comes from Greek mythology, and it comes from Narcissus. So I'm going to do an abridged version of the kind of story myth of Narcissus because I think it's really instructive. So Narcissus was a beautiful young man who was attractive to a lot of people and who mostly held disdain and contempt for other people. So one day, I think he's wandering around the woods, and a love nymph is, like a lot of people, attracted to him. And when eventually she kind of reveals herself to him, he's not interested. And she is so devastated by the experience that she basically kind of, I think, goes around in sort of silence for the rest of her life. And from that gets the name Echo. So it's Narcissus and Echo. Echo's the love nymph that is attracted to Narcissus that he kind of isn't interested in, and she becomes a shadow of her former self and is reduced just to this echo that kind of haunts the woods. So remember that. We'll come back to it. Then I think it's Nemesis, is angry with Narcissus and decides to teach him a lesson. And so Nemesis leads Narcissus to a pool of water within which Narcissus sees his own reflection, and lo and behold, he falls in love with himself. Only at some point to realize that it's a reflection, that it's not a real love, that he's not capable of real love, and he ends up committing suicide. So that is the whole kind of background to this term narcissist. Now, narcissist can mean a range of things depending on whether it's being used kind of colloquially and culturally, and you might notice it's more prevalent, I think, in certainly in the English-speaking world than it has been in common culture. And there are also some clinical definitions. I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm not a trained clinical psychologist. What I'm interested in really is what is the core dynamic here. And the reason I told you this story is because I think the animating dynamic of this story will probably teach you something about narcissism, right? And therefore how to avoid it. Notice that there's Narcissist who's got the attention on himself, and there's Echo who has unrequited love and then becomes a shadow of her former self. And that might paint some kind of picture of what is the system's dynamic? What is the relationship between 2 parts of a system that is needed in order for a narcissist to be in a relationship with you? And you might notice it's not 2 narcissists that are in relationship together. Right? It's a narcissist and someone that is willing to put attention on them, who in effect is willing to give them what we call narcissistic supply, right? The material resource, the love, the attention, in order for that narcissism to stay in place. So all of this I'm saying to point to you, you might start to get curious, and I'm not telling you whether this is true or not. I want to know what will be true or not in your own experience. Could there be some kind of systems dynamic in play that there's a certain set of tendencies that allow a relationship to constellate with a narcissist, right? That could have to do with being more over there and not so much over here, that you are willing to really put your love and attention on someone else in a way that might have a kind of self-forgetting quality or might have a huge validation quality that the narcissist thrives on. But if you weren't willing to do that, it's like the narcissist couldn't really find it so easy to engage in an unconscious game with you. Because I'm going to come from the perspective here that most of this is happening in a sea of unconsciousness, that in full consciousness, if we put the most extreme and kind of psychopathic narcissist tendencies aside, for most people who are more in kind of a mainstream narcissism, there's a kind of unconsciousness there. There's a kind of lack of empathy or lack of reflection, or like I just keep the attention on me, or I'm just kind of really, in more Freudian psychoanalytic terms, I'm keeping other people as objects. I'm using them as objects for my own gratification, right? It's kind of like a form of arrested development. We all need, I sense, at some level, or benefit from a healthy relationship with our own self-regard, with our own self-esteem. But if we use other people as objects to bolster our own self-esteem, then we're getting closer to the game that the narcissist is playing. So if you didn't want to play that game with a narcissist, what would you have to learn? What would you have to cultivate? How would you have to hold yourself and be in yourself? Right? My sense is that for that systems dynamic to play and to stay, there has to be this kind of leaning in, or even maybe an over leaning in towards the other person at times. That if you could learn how to stay more comfortably in your own center, in your own ability to know what yourself and to know what's true, I'm not saying you could completely avoid narcissists. I'm just saying it seems to me that it might be a little bit less likely. And most of what I'm going to teach in this video, it's not like I'm giving you some cast iron guarantee. I'm trying to make this less likely that there's a game that you end up playing that you don't really want to play. So notice that often in life, for two roles to keep in place, there's an unconscious dynamic between them. And if you shift out of that unconscious dynamic, now it's no longer so easy to play that game with you. Okay, so point number 2 is quite different. Point number 2 is for you to get more curious and perhaps start to learn, if you haven't, about unconscious attraction. I'll say it again, for you to get more curious and start to learn about unconscious attraction. So I'm distinguishing unconscious attraction from conscious attraction. And it may come across a little more black and white. The reality may be a little bit more gray and blurred. But unconscious attraction is when you are immediately and normally in a physical, chemical level, you are attracted to someone. There's like an immediate ding, immediate wow, or turn on, or yes, I notice you, and it can be an arresting experience. It can be a common experience for some of us. And we need to learn that kind of unconscious attraction, by unconscious I mean it just kind of happens, right? It's kind of like, precognitive. That kind of unconscious attraction is not a great indicator of a long-term relationship compatibility. And I just want to lay that down, because if you've never really realized that, you might be having an unconscious attraction to a narcissist, right? It might be that the narcissist pattern matches something that happened in your past. Maybe you had a narcissistic caregiver. Maybe one of your earlier lovers as a teenager or as an early 20-something was or is a narcissist. And so there's this kind of pattern that's ready to ping there for you, that you need to learn to experience the ping, the attraction ping, and notice, okay, cool, I'm attracted to this person. That doesn't mean diddly squat in terms of whether I should start to relate to this person and find a place for them in my life, or even invest in getting to know them, right? So once you start to realize that, you get a little bit more sophisticated, you get a little bit more rounded and cultivated in how you approach who you want to be in relationship with. Another way of saying it is you pay less attention to unconscious attraction, and you start to pay more attention to what we could call real compatibility. And it's beyond the scope of this video to go deeply into real compatibility factors. But just for example, to give one that you may have heard me talk about, but if you haven't seen that video, you won't have. We can call it worldview compatibility, right? Worldview compatibility is, at a deep level, do we have an orientation to life, a kind of philosophy, a way of being, a level of development and consciousness, what I take life to be, what you take life to be, what we want to do and orient to in our lives. Are those things really compatible? That has nothing to do with unconscious attraction. You can be unconsciously attracted to all sorts of people, irrespective of their level of consciousness. It's a kind of more of a pattern matching or animalistic kind of thing. And I'm not making it wrong. I'm just saying it's part of life that if you haven't distinguished, you're going to be letting that run your reality unconsciously, have you attracted to and maybe pursuing a relationship with a whole load of guys who, guess what? They're not very good for you. And maybe they are narcissistic in ways that if you were slowing it down and becoming a little more conscious and a little more sober of where you want to put your love attention, you might notice, this person seems a little bit wrapped up in themselves. They seem to shame me. They seem to be shameless. They don't seem to care or empathize with my experience, you can notice that about someone. But it's hard to notice if you've just got all this chemistry and unconscious attraction, and now you're kind of trying to bond and attach, and you've been sexual, and that kind of bonding is running. It's very hard for you to stay conscious and notice, hang on a minute, this person really isn't that into me. They don't see me. They don't notice my uniqueness. It's kind of about them all the time. They're not really willing to invest the time in this relationship that is needed to maybe make it go somewhere. That they use people, perhaps not just me, that they use people as ends, right? Sort of means to their own ends. That stuff is kind of noticeable in sobriety. So the third point that I want to bring you to in this video is learn to cultivate your own sobriety. Now, this won't be the most sexy message that you've heard in your life, but sobriety is sexy in a way, because sobriety, which means not too much and not too little, sobriety means your ability to see things clearly. It means your ability to not fantasize and delude yourself. That is exactly the quality you want, don't you think, if you're in the company of a narcissist? For you to actually notice soberly, like, okay, I don't even have to make this person super wrong. They're welcome to their own narcissism. I'm not going to build a relationship with them. And it's my sobriety that allows me to tell that. It's my sobriety to get reflection from my friends. It's my sobriety to slow it down enough, to get quiet enough with myself to even know my experience and know what's going on, right? It's my sobriety that once I start to get those red flags coming in, I don't ignore them. I'm sober enough to be like, okay, there's something I need to look at here. So instead of going and deepening in relationship with this person, I'm actually going to get curious about what's really going on. I'm going to get curious about how other people orient to them, how other people feel about them, how other people experience them, right? Because typically these narcissistic patterns are probably pervasive in some ways, right? Another thing that you can look out for, kind of, early warning signs. Narcissism is an essentially contested concept, which means there is not just like a one definition that we can go with. But some of the things that do get talked about in relationship to narcissism includes a sense of superiority and arrogance. Can you notice that in people? And by the way, normally when someone has a sense of superiority, it's also at times covering, deeply held, conscious or otherwise, a sense of inferiority. Those two things kind of go together. Do I feel inferior in this person's presence? Now, you could be running some of your own programming, which has you feel less worthy, valuable, and inferior, right? So some of you may also be in there, and kind of notice what goes on around this person. What do other people experience around this person? It's actually inviting you to open up your dating and relationships to other people and to get some input. Ultimately, you have your choice. You have your heart. You have your soul's desire. You have your knowing about relationship. And in terms of rooting out narcissists, that could be something that just opening up your relationship to a little of the light of day, to some feedback and scrutiny, could be really powerful for you. Particularly if you notice when I talk about sobriety, another way of talking about sobriety is a lack of gullibility. Am I talking to you? Are you someone that tends to be a little excessive? Are you someone that maybe is more than a little excessive? Do you tend to be gullible? Are you easily fooled? Do you tend to think the best of people when actually you overlook the ways that people have shortcomings? Do you have an unrealistic sense of people? How dialed in is your intuition? If any of those things isn't strong in you, the chances are you might be a little bit more susceptible to falling into the trance or spell of a narcissist distorted reality field. Right? Because that's the other thing that narcissists have a strong sense, is that they're likely to want to impose their reality on a lot of people, and it's hard to if you find yourself kind of not being able to think very straight or kind of distorted, yes, there could be some of your own work in there, and yes, there could also be some of like, does this person just kind of never open to feedback from other people? Is it always that they turn things around on the people around them, that there's no humility, there's no curiosity, there's no... Now, I do want to distinguish something here, which is sometimes there's a reaction that can look like this that can happen if when you bring things to people, if you bring them in a way that is accusatory, if you bring them in a way that is defensive, or your wound is talking, it can be that you invite that part from someone, right? That most of us prefer to hear things in a form of feedback that we can hear. Most of us prefer to have some kind of sensitivity and attunement where it's possible. And these things can be difficult when it goes down in relationship. But notice, if you're centered and you bring something to someone and you have your own sense of curiosity and it's never able to be received, that might also be a red flag for you. Like, even if they're not narcissists, you might want to be in a relationship where there is the ability for you to give and receive some kind of influence from one another. That, John Gottman, the marriage researcher, puts that as one of his principal things in relationship, is that we do want to have an ability to receive influence from one another. And that's not always easy, right? Other things come up. But just notice what is going on in that realm, and notice it outside of the relationship as well. Is this person able to receive influence from other people, colleagues, co-workers, friends, family? Or are they sort of always in this distorted field that their reality is the only reality in town? Can they never take someone else's perspectives? Can they never empathize? Can they never walk a mile in someone else's shoes? Can they never notice their own frailties and weaknesses, right? Is it always this stance that, I'm the best, unconsciously or another, that I'm the superior one, I'm the one that has... I'm the one that's important here. I'm the one whose needs need to get met. I don't really care about you. I don't really see you as fully human. I don't really see you as someone's needs. You can start to get a flavor of that. And if you haven't got a flavor of it, maybe start to notice it in people that you're not trying to cultivate relationship with. Maybe walk around your workplace. Maybe ask your friends. Maybe try and notice, like, who has this sort of superiority complex and arrogance and narcissistic supply? Let me get more familiar with that energy without being familiar with it because I'm in a relationship with it day to day. Right? The part of your own sobriety is learning how to recognize these tendencies before you're in a bonded love relationship with someone, which obviously can make that a lot easier. So I want to say none of this is to exonerate narcissistic men, right? I would love like you to be part of encouraging the least amount of narcissism in men. I'm up for encouraging a healthy self-love and a healthy self-regard, not one that's unhealthy and disproportionate. And I don't get to decide how men show up in this world, and neither do you, really. Ultimately, what's a better use of your time is to learn to notice the signs, is to notice the early warning signs, how to listen to those red flags so that you can cultivate your own intuition, sobriety, and wisdom and your own guidance, which will serve you really well. If you're disconnected from your own guidance, if you're disconnected from your own intuition, if you're disconnected from your own sense of knowing, and you can't have some kind of clarity and sobriety in how you look at situations, you're probably going to be disappointed in love. Narcissists aside, or narcissists or otherwise, if you don't have some of those abilities to stay close to your own guidance and knowing, it's going to be difficult for you in relationship because you're probably going to be let down. Things are going to at times feel hopeless, completely outside of your control. You're going to be blindsided and surprised. That's the advantage of cultivating sobriety. It stands you in great stead whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you're likely to date a narcissist or not. So this is ongoing development work for most of us. And it happens, I believe, that it's going to help you in the realm of where narcissists might show up in your life. So if you've liked this video, I want to encourage you to watch another one. It's called The 4 Signs That He's Emotionally Unavailable, and it will show up in one of these corners shortly. I'd love you to watch that video because I think it will deepen and continue and sort of dimensionalize some of the themes here. And if you haven't taken it, I want to make an invitation to you to watch my free webinar. You can just click the link. It's the first link that appears below this video. You click it and you can find a time that works for you in your time zone. And it's been getting rave reviews. It's the 3 keys to being relationship ready, and it will teach you how to notice unconsciousness that might be coming up for you into relationship, and how that unconsciousness can have you over and again attracting the same kind of guy, which is not the guy that you want to be in relationship with. So if that's ever happened to you, I really want to encourage you to take the webinar. It's completely free. It will be one of the best investments of your precious time. I'd love to be there with you. So I hope you join us. And in the meantime, thanks for being here. I'm Jack.